It's 3 in the morning. Your alarm is silent. The city is asleep. And your brain has suddenly scheduled an emergency meeting. You're wide awake. Even better, you've had an incredibly clear thought. One so important that you need to write it down immediately. By morning, it will probably say, "Buy better cheese." Then you open your sleep tracker. There's a gap in the graph. Your score is down. And a completely ordinary awakening suddenly looks like a system failure. But in pre-industrial Europe, people often talked about a first sleep and a second sleep. And in 1992, a similar pattern appeared in participants during a laboratory experiment. So what actually keeps us awake? The awakening itself, or the panic we create right after it? Waking up in the middle of the night does not automatically mean you have insomnia. Sometimes the real problem begins only after you notice that you're awake. You look at the clock. It doesn't just say 3:08 a.m. It says you have exactly 3 hours and 52 minutes left before the alarm. Now you need to fall asleep immediately, calmly, naturally, and preferably within 30 seconds. Your phone adds bright light, messages, and a sleep score. A harmless pause receives an official diagnosis from your wrist. The night is ruined. Recovery has been canceled. You put the screen away, but now you're monitoring your breathing, searching for the perfect side of the pillow, and calculating every lost minute. Sleep has become an exam, and you are somehow the student, the teacher, and the anxious person watching from the back of the room. The harder you try to switch off, the more closely you check whether it's working. Eventually, you turn the phone on again. Much more time has passed than you thought. The awakening itself was brief. The fight against it lasted all night. So why does this pause scare us so much if people once had a name for it? In 2001, historian Roger Ekirch published research on sleep in pre-industrial Europe. Instead of smartwatch data, he worked with diaries, medical texts, court records, prayer books, and other written sources. And the same two expressions kept appearing: first sleep and second sleep. Today, that sounds almost like a subscription plan, but writers at the time did not need to explain what it meant. If someone wrote that an event happened after the first sleep, the reader understood which part of the night they were talking about. People went to bed in the evening and slept for several hours. Then they woke up, remained awake for a while, and later entered a second period of sleep that lasted until morning. That does not mean all of Europe followed a perfectly synchronized schedule. 4 hours asleep, 2 hours awake, then 4 more hours asleep. That neat formula came later as a convenient simplification. What matters is that nighttime wakefulness was familiar enough to have a place in everyday language. The remaining question was whether this was simply a cultural habit or whether human sleep can naturally split into 2 parts without an alarm clock. In 1992, sleep researcher Thomas Ware decided to see what would happen to modern people under conditions that resembled very long winter nights. Every day, participants spent about 14 hours in darkness. They were not given a special 2-phase sleep schedule. Nobody asked them to role-play medieval farmers. At first, they slept more or less the way they normally did, but after several weeks, the pattern changed. Their sleep began to divide into 2 parts. A person would sleep for several hours, wake up, remain calmly awake in the dark, and then fall asleep again. This did not look like a typical night of insomnia. The participants did not need to check the time, prepare for work, or mentally subtract minutes from tomorrow's productivity. The experiment showed that under long periods of darkness, modern human sleep can reorganize itself. But it did not prove that everyone should immediately switch to a 4+2+4 schedule. These were unusual laboratory conditions, not a newly discovered instruction manual from the manufacturer. The study showed that a calm period of nighttime wakefulness is possible. But what did people do during that pause outside the laboratory? The period between first and second sleep did not look the same in every home. Some people stayed in bed and talked. Others prayed, reflected on their dreams, or took care of small household tasks. Written sources also mention intimacy after the first sleep. Apparently, nighttime wakefulness had a fairly broad job description. But night was still night. Candles cost money, so not everyone could turn a room into a 24-hour office. Most people relied on glowing coals, a weak fire, or moonlight, a free source of illumination with absolutely no respect for scheduling. After a few minutes, the eyes adjusted to the darkness. A person could begin to make out furniture and familiar shapes in the room. That was enough to check the fire, comfort a child, close a door, or reach the animals. Reading was more difficult. Books and letters usually required a candle or lamp. Moonlight is excellent for atmosphere. It is less impressive with small handwriting. Visibility depended on the weather, the season, the phase of the moon, and the wealth of the household. People had not defeated darkness. They had simply learned how to move through it. But human activity after sunset began long before houses, candles, and written prayers. In South Africa's Wonderwork Cave, archaeologists found evidence of fire dating back roughly 1 million years. Burned particles were located inside a cultural layer, which suggests that fire was probably used inside the cave rather than being carried in by a natural wildfire. Archaeology, unfortunately, did not preserve a transcript of that evening. We do not know who sat around the fire, what they argued about, or whether one person already had a habit of interrupting every story with a better one. But the discovery shows something important. Humans had created a small circle of light that allowed them to remain together after sunset. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied how fire affects conversation. In 2014, she published research on evening discussions among the Jew/Hawansi people of southern Africa. During the day, people spoke more often about work, food, and immediate practical tasks. At night, around the fire, there were more stories, jokes, memories, and conversations about other people. The Jew/Hawansi are modern people, not a preserved window into the Stone Age. But the study demonstrates how fire can change the social atmosphere. It did more than extend the day. It created a separate time for storytelling. Eventually, that small circle of light expanded into streets and entire cities. The night we know today did not disappear the moment someone first flipped an electric switch. Humans redesigned darkness gradually over several centuries. Even the word curfew comes from the Old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. In densely built cities, an open flame could turn one unfortunate evening into a neighborhood-wide emergency. So residents were ordered to cover or extinguish their fires. Later, light moved out of the home and into the streets. In 1667, Paris introduced systematic street lighting. Every evening, lamplighters lit oil lamps. Every morning, they extinguished and maintained them. The city had effectively created a massive lighting network, just without an app or customer support. In the 19th century, gas lighting made streets, theaters, stores, and factories much brighter. Nighttime activity no longer depended only on expensive candles and weak household lamps. By the end of the 19th century, electric lighting was becoming more practical and widely available. Thomas Edison played an important role in its commercial spread, but the night was not transformed by one inventor or one light bulb. Factory shifts, railroads, and standardized clock time increasingly separated human schedules from sunset. Sleep had to fit inside a predetermined nighttime window. For centuries, we worked to make the day longer. Now the result lies next to the pillow and shines directly into our eyes. Your phone may not have caused the awakening, but it is extremely good at informing your body that the night is now officially over. Light from the screen reaches the retina. For the circadian system, light is one of the main signals used to estimate the time of day. Exposure to light at night can delay sleepiness and affect melatonin production. The strength of that effect depends on brightness, wavelength, duration, and the distance between the light source and your eyes. So the popular claim that your brain mistakes your phone for the sun is too simplistic. A screen is not the same as daylight. It does not warm the planet or support photosynthesis. But a bright rectangle held a few inches from your face is still very different from a dark bedroom. And light is only the beginning. Next comes information. The time, an alarm, a message, a news alert, an email, and one short video that somehow becomes another short video. A 2013 study led by Kenneth Wright showed that living under a more natural cycle of light and darkness can shift the timing of the human internal clock. The body really does respond to when light arrives. The screen may not have awakened you, but it gave your eyes light, your brain work, and your anxiety exact numbers. That still does not mean everyone should divide every night into 2 separate sleeps. For a long time, 8 uninterrupted hours were presented as the universal standard for healthy sleep. Now the internet has discovered a different eternal truth. Apparently, humans are supposed to sleep for 4 hours, stay awake for 2, and then sleep for another 4. One rigid rule has been replaced with another: progress. But the historical evidence does not justify turning segmented sleep into a law of nature. The strongest written evidence for first and second sleep comes from pre-industrial Europe. Winter nights there could be much longer than summer nights. People often had more time between sunset and the beginning of the working day. Closer to the equator, day length changes less throughout the year. In hot climates, some rest may also have shifted into the daytime. Sleep patterns were shaped by work, childcare, safety, wealth, climate, and the customs of a particular society. People themselves also differ. One person wakes during the night, remains calm, and falls asleep again. Another sleeps in one uninterrupted stretch. Both patterns can fall within the range of normal sleep. Segmented sleep is one possibility available to the human body. It is not a mandatory factory setting. 8 hours were never an eternal law. But 2 separate sleeps are not one either. The practical conclusion is much simpler. Waking up once during the night does not mean your body is broken. Imagine that tonight you wake up again at around 3 in the morning. The first useful step is not to declare the night a disaster before the investigation is complete. You do not need to check the time immediately, open your sleep tracker, and calculate the remaining sleep with the precision of a financial audit. A bright screen, the news, and work messages give your brain new tasks at exactly the moment when it would be better to preserve a nighttime state. If you feel calm and sleepiness seems to be returning, you can simply remain in the dark. If wakefulness continues and frustration begins to build, insomnia treatment recommendations often suggest leaving the bed briefly, doing something quiet under dim light, and returning when you feel sleepy again. But the history of first and second sleep does not make real insomnia disappear. Clinically, sleep problems are generally considered chronic when they occur at least 3 nights per week, continue for around 3 months, and cause meaningful difficulties during the day. In that situation, it is better to speak with a healthcare professional than to independently reconstruct the schedule of a 17th century European. The goal is not to deliberately wake up in the middle of the night. The goal is to stop treating every awakening as proof that something is malfunctioning. Maybe the pause itself did not ruin your sleep. Maybe anxiety turned it into a sleepless night.